Welcome to the Teach Travel Adventure podcast. I'm Jamie from ESL Teacher 365. Today's guest is Katie, a teacher from the UK who's currently teaching in Japan through the JET program. She's also taught in China and online and has a lot of knowledge to share. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast to share all of your knowledge about teaching in Japan.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So you have taught in a few different places, not just Japan. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey as a TEFL teacher and how you ended up where you are today?
Yeah, so I started off originally when I was a university student, just doing online teaching and in-person tutoring. And then I had the opportunity to teach at some summer camp programs in China. I actually did that for 3 summers in a row in various camps across China. And that was my first proper teacher board experience. And it was really great because it was a more supported experience of teaching abroad. Because there were teachers there to support us. It was through a more organized program, and that was fantastic and made me realize that what I really wanted to do was become a teacher, as an actual career. Then I did a PGC, which is the UK main teaching qualification. It's a 1-year program training to be a teacher based at a university in the UK. And from that I then became a UK teacher for a year. After that, I decided I wanted to go back to teaching abroad. That experience I'd had in China was incredible. I like teaching in the UK, a lot of challenges in the sort of state school education system. But I thought the thing I wanted to do was teach abroad. That was my original dream. So I got offered a job teaching at an international school back in China. But then things kind of fell through because of the pandemic and everything that was going on at the time. And I ended up spending a year and a half waiting on visas and teaching online again. And during that year and a half, I also launched a tutoring program through my company, Abridge Academy, started selling teacher resources for teachers, started working with companies like All School and Out School, Powerfish, a lot of online teaching companies. And things really grew actually during that year and a half. But still, I wanted to teach abroad. And I applied for my current job that I've got in Japan. I originally applied in 2020. And eventually I got here in April 2022. So a year and a half after I applied. And now I'm an ESL teacher at public schools in Japan.
Our journeys are a little bit similar because I also did a summer teach abroad, kind of testing it out first. And I do recommend that if you're thinking about teaching abroad, but the thought of committing 1 or 2 years, living abroad is a little bit scary still, definitely look into summer programs because it can be a good way to test it out, see if it's a good fit for you, and then you can decide, all right, I really like this, or not for me. So tell us a little bit about your school where you're teaching right now. What ages are you teaching? Are you in a large city, a small city? What's it like?
Sure. Yeah. So I teach in a small city that's just outside Kyoto. So it's ideal for being a place to be based in terms of travel opportunities. It's a really great location, I think, for teachers, anyone who wants to experience that overseas lifestyle. And I'm actually employed by the city council, not by a school directly. Okay. This is quite common in Japan. So I came through something called the JET program, which is a government-run program. And they placed you either directly in a school or with a local council that then places you in schools. So I actually teach in, gosh, how many schools? 1, 2, 3, 7 different schools.
Wow.
Quite a lot. So I spend 4 days a week at my main school, which is a junior high school. So that's age 11 to 14. And that's my main school for 4 days a week. And then 1 day a week, I rotate around various elementary schools and kindergartens within the city.
How is that for lesson planning? Do you have materials that are prepared for you? Are you expected to kind of come up with everything? How does that work?
It varies on the school. So in my main school, the one I teach 4 days a week at, I'm responsible for lesson planning. We have a textbook that we're given, which to be honest, I'm not a big fan of. But there's a textbook. So there's a curriculum, a syllabus to follow. But I usually plan and prepare all the lessons myself. Everything's done in collaboration with our co-teachers. So on the JET program, we're hired as an assistant language teacher. I'm not officially a main teacher. I think that's partly because they don't recognize UK teaching qualifications in the Japanese public school system. So I'm officially an assistant teacher, but I'm the main teacher in the classroom, really. The actual official teacher sits in the back and does their marking and occasionally tells a kid to shut up if they're causing problems. That's about it. So yeah, I plan all the lessons. I have to make all the resources or find things online. Definitely a tip if anyone's teaching any subject, but particularly teaching ESL, there's so many free resources online. Don't make everything yourself from scratch. In the schools that I rotate around, so on Wednesdays when I go to my visit schools, they prepare the lesson plan because they're teaching all of the other classes, they see those kids all the time, whereas I'm just popping in for a random lesson. So they know how it fits into their curriculum better. So they send me a lesson plan, but then I'll usually adapt that plan. Like it will say something like, start with a fun song, we're going to cover these 5 words, then do a game, and then like end the lesson. That will be the plan. So I need to come up with what the song is and what the game is, and some kind of activity. Quite a lot of the younger kids, they want kind of more fun, engaging, exciting lessons. So I have kind of a repertoire of common games that don't require too much preparation.
That's so true. I like to kind of refer to it as like having something in my pocket at all times, especially with young kids. You have to be prepared for anything and everything. So those games and activities that they're going to enjoy are engaging, and you can easily adapt them to fit whatever vocabulary or grammar point that they're working on, are lifesavers. And I think as you teach more and more, you get to have more of your personal pack of things in your pocket. And it's hard being a teacher starting out because you don't have those resources, you don't have the experience, but it does get easier.
Absolutely. And I feel like being able to adapt is such a really key skill as a teacher. When I first started teaching, I was like, oh, the most important thing is have the perfect lesson plan with a perfect set of slides, this amazing worksheet I spent 2 hours making. And like that was the most important thing ever when I was a new teacher. But then I very quickly realized that lesson plan goes straight out the window the minute you walk in the classroom anyway. And the kids don't engage well with the worksheet because it turned out I didn't understand that they didn't have the required understanding the knowledge they needed to access that resource, and the whole thing is chaos. So I think learning to adapt, and like we say, having those kind of easy low prep games and activities and things you can quickly like pull out of your hat instantly when you need it to adapt in the class is actually more important than having the perfect pre-prepared lesson plan.
So you're here with the JET program. So can you tell us a little bit about what the visa process was like for you? I know you said originally you were going to go in earlier, and then obviously with everything that's been going on, there's been a lot of delays, but in general, what kind of documents did you need, and what was the process like for you?
So actually the whole process was very straightforward, and that's because I came through the JET program. There's actually various different routes into teaching in Japan. Most people come as an assistant language teacher like I did. There's either the JET program, or there's various private like dispatch companies that basically run exactly the same thing. But rather than going through the government, you're going through a private company, you end up doing the same job. But because I went with the JET program and it's run through the government, they actually organized the whole visa process for me. So all I had to do was turn up the embassy with a very simple form that was just your name and address, that kind of info, and my passport, gave it in at the embassy. And then when I got to the airport for my flight, they turned up with my passport and a visa in it. Which was great. I mean, I had to do that process twice because our original departure got cancelled, then the visa expired and we had to then apply again because of all the COVID delays. But yeah, it was actually very straightforward. I think if you do it even with a private company rather than through the government program, there might be a little bit more paperwork involved, like about your job, that you have to prove you've got a job to go to or something. But to be honest, I think Japan is quite straightforward in terms of visas. I have what's called an instructor visa, which I think is the main visa that people use for teaching in Japan.
Can you describe what a typical day is like as a teacher in Japan? So what kind of hours do you work? What kind of things do you like to do after work? Can you explain what that's like?
Sure, yeah. So my contracted hours are 8:30 to 4:15. So I have to be in school from 8:30 to 4:15. And one thing I think is really great about my job is that compared to the UK, I have very little work outside of class time. I mean, I had to plan lessons, I do marking and things like that. But I think the way in which my timetable is organized, again, I don't know if this is just because my schools are more organized or whether this is a Japan in general thing.
Yeah.
But I teach multiple classes at the same grade level. So like each week I normally just have to plan for 3 grade levels, which means I only really have to prep 3 or maybe up to about 5 lessons per week. I teach those lessons to multiple classes of students. So I don't have to do loads of lesson planning basically, which is great because in the UK I was planning like 20 classes a week, all from scratch. I normally teach on average 4 classes a day. It obviously varies a bit because of timetabling. We have a morning meeting in Japan, which is normally about 10 minutes. And they just kind of quickly introduce, what's going on that day. So it's very quick. Then classes actually start just before 9, at 5 to 9. So I'll teach 4 classes day, and I'll have like 2 free periods a day. There's 6 lesson periods in a day. In those other lesson periods, I'll be working on lesson planning. I'll be doing some marking, perhaps. I might be talking to some of the other teachers to like discuss upcoming lesson plans, that kind of thing. And that continues until like 4:15, get the train back home. And in the evenings, I don't have to do any work, which is amazing because, as I say, compared to the UK, where I took a lot of work home with me, now I can actually enjoy my evenings.
Wow, yeah, that schedule sounds really nice compared to,
Yes.
like you said, your UK schedule. I think a lot of teachers in the United States as well. It's like there's so much to do, and you're in class, you have to be supporting the kids and running all the activities and everything, and then just taking home all that work. So if you're a teacher and you're feeling burnt out, try a different country because it may be better.
Absolutely. Like, I think if I stuck it out in the UK much longer, I would have quit, and I'm totally honest.
So tell us a little bit about your online teaching. Are you still online teaching now? And what do you like about online teaching?
Yeah, so online teaching is like something I started doing back when I was a university student, and I was like dipping in and out of it throughout the time as a student, and then doing my teacher training, and then teaching. And then during COVID, there was that year and a half when I was stuck with desperately looking for some income to pay the bills.
Yeah.
Like, it's a very flexible job, which is great. It also pays very well. I think sometimes when people are thinking of like side jobs back when I was a student, the average in the UK, you might get like £8 to £10 an hour, something like that. Whereas doing online teaching, I would get double that. Obviously, you've got work outside, like to plan your lessons and that kind of thing. But yeah, I initially got into online teaching just because it was a very well paid supplementary job you can do that's very flexible. And I worked independently. I've worked with different agencies. I've worked on different marketplace platforms. I tried a lot of things with online teaching. I think one thing that's really important if you're teaching online is to find your niche, like find what you're a specialist in, and really focus in on that. Because there are big mass market ESL companies that a lot of people teach with. I used to teach with Powerfish before, and then I ended up focusing on teaching with marketplace platforms, particularly Outschool and then AllSchool. So these are where you design your own class, you come up with a lesson plan, you can pick like any topic. It doesn't just have to be general English classes. And then the company helps advertise it, and they provide like a platform for you to teach on. So they're doing all the tech side and the marketing side, so you focus on teaching. And I really enjoyed that. And that's when I started actually earning like better salaries than I was getting with mass market companies. And one thing I'd really say, if you're teaching with a marketplace platform, find your niche, find what you love doing. For me, it was like fun science themed classes that weren't like academic science classes, or more for ESL students. Like, I had a Science in the News discussion club, was probably my most popular class. And we just talked about interesting news articles that were about science topics. So these were kids who liked science, but they wanted to improve their discussion and conversation and sort of debating skills. And I also talked with a few very niche online companies, particularly those that were working on university application preparation. And again, this is where I think, compared to a mass market ESL platform, these companies, if you can get hired by them, again, better salaries and I think more support for teachers as well, because it's often a smaller kind of community of teachers. And then the last few years, I then moved into teaching independently. So this is where I find my own students on social media and advertise my own classes.
Yeah, I did like kind of the opposite. So I started with independent online teaching test prep for Cambridge students. And then I had some contacts here in Australia because I was working at a school here. And then we had our shutdowns. And so some classes went online. Then I got into Outschool, and I agree with you about having a niche. I actually teach ballet on Outschool, and I do have a lot of ESL learners, which is interesting. So my classes kind of can fit anyone. And now I'm testing out a few different companies. So I kind of did like the backwards of what people normally do. But I think it just goes to show that there's a lot of different ways to teach online. There's a lot of opportunities out there. If you aren't necessarily super interested in teaching English or ESL, like you said, you taught science classes, I do dance, you can teach other subjects. There's just a few, you kind of have to think of where am I going to teach this, or how am I going to get my students? But yeah, it's a nice flexible job. I agree with that. And the pay is insane. It's like so much better. hour and work-wise than school sometimes, which is a little bit crazy.
Yeah, I think when it comes to online teaching, you do need to be more confident with like how to brand or market yourself, even when you're teaching with a marketplace platform that supposedly does the advertising for you. But knowing what your personal brand is, like what your niche is, what you specialize in, what qualifications or experience you have that can sort of back you up as an expert in what you're doing.
So tell us a little bit about your curriculum. So you've created your own curriculum. It's mostly for teaching online, but do you use it in your in-person classes as well?
Yeah, sure. So I developed the Abridge Academy curriculum. This actually came out of our own tutoring program. So I very briefly mentioned before that when I was a year and a half, when I was at home trying to figure out how I could teach abroad during the pandemic, we launched our own tutoring program with Abridge Academy in partner with one of like a Chinese school. And this was a very big learning experience. One of the learning things that came out of that was we need a curriculum and we need lesson resources that are really high quality and specifically designed for online classes. Like kids want to click on things, move things on the screen, interact and engage with materials. They don't want like a passive PowerPoint slide or something. So from that, we then started developing our own curriculum. And then when the Chinese companies started getting shut down with the new regulations that came out, everyone was looking to go independent and they needed curriculum, they needed teaching resources. So the Abridge Academy curriculum we then launched as like a pre-made curriculum. It's focused on ESL classes and it's more aimed at online students, but you can also use it in person. Like I also use it in Japan for my in-person classes, particularly some of the grammar lessons and things like that. It doesn't just have to be for online learning. But yeah, it's like interactive slides. Kids can click on things, they can move things in quizzes, and it's designed to take advantage of the fact you're using a computer and you're using it in an online environment. There's actually a free version as well if you'd like to sign up for free. Maybe we can pop the link somewhere around the video. But if you go to abridgeacademy.com/curriculum, there's a free tier. You can sign up to try it all out. And you get access to like a selection of lessons across the different levels and different courses that are available. Because there's the core curriculum, which is broken into 5 different levels. It's still broadly aimed at beginner to pre-intermediate students and so your step-by-step kind of lessons. And then there's the expansion courses, which are supplementary extra lessons. Some of them are grammar focused. There's a whole bunch of science themed lessons that I use for my own science students. There's like a debating course, things like that. So yeah, there's lots of different resources depending on what it is that you teach.
Oh, wow, that sounds amazing. So yeah, I will have that link down below if you're watching the video. Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, Katie. It was really nice to learn about Japan, but also about online teaching. So thanks again.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it and I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to everyone and share some of these experiences.